would control it. Well, it turns out that the people that had the knob could tolerate about twice the level of noise, even though the knob didn't do anything. The knob was not connected to anything. Even the illusion of control reduced their stress and increased their ability to tolerate this noxious stimuli. Well, I think one of the psychological effects this has on musicians is that they forget that, I mean, not to sound trite, but anybody can make a difference. I mean, nobody, if one waits for permission to start going out there and trying to change things, you're going to wait for a long time. And sometimes you're going to get opposition, but very seldom is somebody just going to say, you know, shut up, you shouldn't be doing this, this is not your job. That's not been my experience. Generally,
it certainly helps if the situation itself is fluid.
It's true.
And changes are happening.
It's true. And one of the pieces that happened in Milwaukee was that there was this desire and hunger, because we were in the process of beginning to turn the institution around. We had some new management, and they were very anxious to jump on things, you know, that could look like there was change.
And the internet is something that we are still in the process of figuring out.
Right.
So anybody's opinion is at this point more or less as good as anybody else's. Right. Let me, completely out of left field, bring up a discussion I was involved in with a group of orchestra musicians about another area where change seemed to be a good idea, but nobody could figure out how to make it start. I was talking to people from the Pittsburgh Symphony, New Jersey, New Mexico, and Richmond, I think, and there was management from another orchestra, but I think everybody else was a musician. And the subject was the feeling that was unanimous in the room that musicians don't look lively enough on stage. So, that may be debatable according to some, but it was a feeling here that it'd be nice if musicians reacted to the audience, smiled, looked like they were involved in the playing. And then the question was, how can we start changing this? And the discussion, I won't say people were negative, people were really cheerful and having a great time, but one of the first things to be established was that if management decided to make this a priority, that would be the kiss of death. I naively, sitting as an observer, asked what would happen if the board said they wanted this. The person from management, somebody really capable, said, the normal agreement says that the musicians must abide by any reasonable request of the board. This would be considered unreasonable, and the musicians would file a grievance. So it became clear that the only initiative could come from the musicians themselves, but the musicians weren't used to doing this and didn't have the institutions to do it. So one principal second violinist said, maybe I could organize my section. Somebody else said, maybe I could go to the people who are most recalcitrant on this subject and try to change their minds. Here is something that is not in flux, but people wanted it to be. Right. How can orchestras adapt to the need to change things like that there don't seem to be mechanisms for changing?
Well, that's a tough one. It's interesting because I can see if that had happened in my orchestra and the management had come and said, you know, it is now part of your job to move and look interesting and you have to smile. I mean, I would have been the first person to have filed a grievance, because as a union official and to some extent just as a musician, my first thought would have been, and what did they do to me if I don't? Because, in fact, a lot of what unions do is think about worst cases. I mean, we have, in a sense, it's like a defense attorney. I mean, you have to think about what's the worst thing they can do to you if it doesn't happen. Where does this path go potentially that's really bad?
But no matter what the intentions are behind it, management would be making a naked power grab, because until further definition of the situation occurs, they appear to be saying that they can decide what the proper behavior is and what the sanctions are, and who decides whether anybody should be sanctioned for not doing this.
And as a matter of principle, the musicians and certainly the union would resist that.
Right.
just because we wouldn't be doing our job if we didn't. We wouldn't be
Right.
protecting our members. That's not to say, I mean, one of the things that's been interesting for me about being a union officer is we have so successfully trained managements over 50 years. It's such a unionized industry that the only people, well, not only, but generally the people one ends up defending are people actually that have misbehaved. But, you know, if you don't defend them, you can't defend anybody. So often it's like being a defense attorney. You end up defending people that really probably were guilty of doing what they do, but they still have rights. But I think, yeah, it does have to go back to the players. And how do you empower the musicians to talk among themselves? Because they even will have some of the same suspicions. There's some of the people in the seconds that say, well, who's the principal second to be telling me, is he in bed with the conductor? You know, are they all I mean, metaphorically. You know, is this all a plot to get us old farts back here fired? And again, it's a consequence, I think, of being in a situation where you have no control, that paranoia reigns, that musicians tend to paranoia not because they're paranoid people, but because the workplace is, on some fundamental level, so dysfunctional and so inimical to mental health and normal relationships. My own protest against that, and it's easier to make as a principal, is that I talk to conductors. I even talk to the music director. You know, I'll make a joke. I mean, I refuse to sit there and shut up. Now, on the other hand, nobody has said to me, shut up. I mean, if they did that, I probably would. But, you know, I don't like the relationship, just the passivity. You know, if I have something to say, I'll try to figure out a way of saying it within, you know, I'm not going to tell them that the winds are out of tune. That's really not my job. But if there's an ensemble problem that we're involved in, I'm going to take some initiative in raising it with him. But even that is fairly unusual in orchestras. And if I wasn't the principal player, I couldn't do it.